In the gleaming halls of the Galactic Military Academy, where plasma rifles hummed with deadly efficiency and antimatter charges could vaporize entire city blocks, the most feared weapon ever demonstrated was built from a wooden desk, synthetic string, and the quiet determination of a species that once hunted mammoths with sharpened sticks. The instructor had asked for innovation. The human delivered extinction. What happened in Advanced Weapons Theory Classroom 7 Delta that day would be whispered about in the corridors of power across 17 star systems, studied by military strategists for generations, and forever change how the galaxy viewed the seemingly primitive species from the third planet of an unremarkable yellow star. Because sometimes, the most dangerous thing in the universe isn't the latest technology, it's remembering how your ancestors survived when they had nothing but their wits and the will to live. The demonstration lasted 37 seconds. The implications would last forever. The morning sun of Kepler 442b cast long shadows across the crystalline spires of the Galactic Military Academy, its amber light filtering through the atmospheric processors that kept this world habitable for the dozens of species that called it home. Cadet Marcus Chen stood at the observation deck of Dormitory Block 7, watching as transport shuttles descended from orbit, carrying fresh recruits from across the known galaxy. 3 years into his tenure at the Academy, Marcus had grown accustomed to being the oddity. Humans were still relatively new to the galactic community, having achieved faster-than-light travel only 50 years prior. Most species regarded them with a mixture of curiosity and condescension. After all, while the Zeridians had been building quantum processors for millennia and the Thrakkery had perfected antimatter weaponry before humans had discovered fire, Earth's children had only recently figured out how to leave their own solar system without killing themselves in the process. The Academy itself was a marvel of engineering that spoke to the collaborative efforts of 17 different civilizations. Towers of living coral grown by the aquatic Narration spiraled upward alongside geometric structures of pure energy maintained by the crystalline Keth. Hover platforms connected buildings that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, courtesy of Valdorian phase technology that made Marcus's head hurt when he tried to understand it. As he made his way to advanced weapons theory, Marcus reflected on how different his life had become since leaving Earth. The gravity here was lighter, the air tasted of ozone and metal, and the food synthesizers still couldn't quite replicate the taste of his grandmother's dumplings. But he had adapted, as humans always did. The classroom buzzed with conversation in 17 different languages, though the universal translator implants ensured everyone could understand each other. Marcus took his usual seat in the back row, nodding to his lab partner, a six-armed Kralian named Zixty-H whose species had evolved from pack hunters on a high-gravity world. Despite their fearsome appearance, the Kralians were surprisingly gentle, preferring complex strategy games to direct confrontation. Ready for another thrilling lecture on theoretical plasma dynamics? Zixty-H asked, their mandibles clicking in what passed for amusement among their kind. Marcus was about to respond when the classroom fell silent. Instructor Valish had entered, her 8-foot frame moving with predatory grace. The Thrakkery were apex predators from a world where everything tried to kill everything else, and it showed in every movement. Her scaled hide bore the ceremonial scars of a veteran warrior, and her 3 eyes missed nothing. Weapons, she began without preamble, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had ended battles with her bare hands, are tools of force multiplication. They allow the user to project power beyond their natural capabilities. She gestured with one of her 4 arms, and a holographic display materialized above her desk. Today, we will examine the evolution of weapons technology across our various species. The hologram shifted, showing primitive clubs and spears from dozens of worlds. Every species begins with simple tools. The Valdorians used crystallized thought. The Zeridians employed bioelectric manipulation. The Keth learned to weaponize dimensional fractures. Her gaze swept the classroom, pausing momentarily on Marcus. And humans, well, humans threw rocks. A ripple of polite amusement passed through the class. Marcus felt his cheeks burn, but he kept his expression neutral. It was an old joke, one he had heard variations of since his first day at the Academy. Humans, the species that had conquered their world by throwing progressively better rocks at their problems. Instructor Valish continued her lecture, detailing the sophisticated weapons systems that each species had developed. The Thrakkery antimatter lance that could crack moons. The Narration sonic disruptors that could liquefy internal organs. The Keth reality anchors that could trap enemies in temporal loops. Each weapon was a masterpiece of engineering, representing thousands of years of technological development. Now, Valish said as the lecture wound down, I want each of you to demonstrate your understanding of weapons theory by creating a functional weapon using only materials available in this classroom. You have 1 hour. Marcus looked around the room, taking inventory of available resources. Standard academy furniture included desks made from Baldorian timber, chairs with metal frameworks, various electronic components, and the usual assortment of writing implements. Most of his classmates were already hard at work, combining electronic components with their species' natural abilities. ZixTH was weaving some kind of energy web between their 6 hands, drawing power from the room's electrical grid. A Zeridian student was growing what looked like a bioweapon from a sample of her own genetic material. The Solketh representative was doing something incomprehensible with geometric shapes that seemed to exist in more dimensions than Marcus could perceive. Marcus stared at his desk, running his hands along the smooth grain of the wood. Valdorian timber was prized throughout the galaxy for its strength and flexibility. The trees it came from grew in the high-gravity environment of Valder Prime, developing a unique cellular structure that made them incredibly resilient. The Academy used it because it was both beautiful and practically indestructible under normal classroom conditions. An idea began to form in Marcus's mind, but he pushed it aside. It was too simple, too primitive. Surely Instructor Valish expected something more sophisticated from Academy students. He looked at the electronic components scattered on nearby desks, wondering if he could somehow fashion an energy weapon. But, as minutes ticked by and his more technologically gifted classmates made visible progress, Marcus found himself returning to his original idea. He thought about his grandfather, who had been an archery instructor back on Earth. The old man had always insisted that the bow was humanity's first true precision weapon, the tool that had allowed early humans to hunt prey larger and stronger than themselves. Simplicity is sophistication, his grandfather used to say. A weapon that works is better than a weapon that should work. Marcus made his decision. He stood and approached Instructor Valish's desk. Ma'am, I'd like to request permission to partially disassemble my desk. Valish raised one eyebrow ridge, her 3 eyes focusing on him with predatory interest. Explain your reasoning, Cadet Chen. I believe I can create an effective weapon using the structural components, ma'am. The wood has properties that would be suitable for my intended design. Proceed, she said, making a note on her datapad. But, remember, you will be judged on both functionality and innovation. Marcus nodded and returned to his workstation. He began by carefully examining the desk's construction. Valdorian furniture was assembled using traditional joinery techniques, respecting the cultural values of the tree shepherds who grew the timber. The desk legs were connected to the top with precisely cut mortise and tenon joints, held in place by wooden pegs rather than metal fasteners. Working carefully to avoid damage that couldn't be repaired, Marcus disassembled the desk. The desktop was too thick and heavy for his purposes, but one of the side panels was perfect. It was long, relatively narrow, and had the right balance of flexibility and strength. Using a small laser cutter from the electronics station, Marcus began to shape the wood. The laser tool was designed for precision work on circuit boards, but it could etch and score organic materials as well. He worked slowly, remembering his grandfather's lessons about wood grain and stress points. The bow began to take shape. Marcus carved a subtle double curve into the wood, thinning the center section while leaving the tips thicker for strength. He tested the flexibility carefully, bending the wood just enough to feel how it responded to stress. Around him, his classmates continued their own projects. The air filled with the sounds of construction, electronic whining, biological squelching, and several noises that Marcus couldn't identify. A few students had completed their weapons and were waiting nervously for the demonstration phase. The string was the next challenge. Marcus looked around the classroom, considering his options. The electronic stations had various types of cable, but most were too rigid or too fragile for his needs. Then, he spotted something perfect, the synthetic fiber used in Thrakkery body armor maintenance kits. Every Academy cadet carried a basic maintenance kit for their environmental suits, and the Thrakkery versions included ultra-strong synthetic fibers that could be woven into temporary armor repairs. The material was designed to be incredibly strong while remaining flexible, and it had the right properties for a bowstring. Marcus carefully extracted several strands of the fiber and began braiding them together. The process was meditative, requiring focus and patience. His grandfather had taught him that a bowstring was more than just a piece of cord, it was a critical component that had to be perfectly matched to the bow's characteristics. As he worked, Marcus became aware that some of his classmates had stopped their own projects to watch him. The concept of a bow was apparently unfamiliar to most galactic species. Several students exchanged puzzled glances, clearly wondering what this human thought he was accomplishing with such primitive methods. "Interesting approach, Cadet Chen," came a voice from behind him. Marcus turned to see Instructor Valish watching his work with apparent fascination. "I must admit, I'm not familiar with this particular weapon's configuration." "It's called a bow, ma'am," Marcus explained, continuing his work on the string. "An ancient human weapon that stores energy mechanically and releases it to propel projectiles." "Projectiles?" Valish's third eye blinked independently of the other two, a Thackeray gesture that indicated deep curiosity. "What sort of projectiles?" Marcus gestured toward a pile of writing implements on a nearby desk. "Arrows, ma'am. Though in this case, I'll be using improvised ones." He selected several styluses from the pile. The Academy used specialized writing implements that were standardized across all member species, metal rods about 8 inches long with a writing tip at one end and a neural interface port at the other. "Those styluses are composed of titanium carbide alloy," Valish observed. "Hardly what I would consider effective projectiles." "With respect, ma'am, effectiveness often depends more on delivery method than on the projectile itself." Marcus began modifying the styluses, using the laser cutter to add simple fletching made from plastic sheeting. The process was time-consuming, but he wanted to demonstrate the principle properly. As the hour drew to a close, Marcus completed his bow. It was a simple design, nothing like the compound bows and high-tech equipment he had used in archery competitions back on Earth, but it was functional. The Valdorian wood had proved perfect for the purpose, its cellular structure providing exactly the right combination of strength and flexibility. He strung the bow carefully, testing the tension and making minor adjustments to the brace height. The weapon felt good in his hands, balanced and responsive. It wasn't the most sophisticated projectile weapon ever built, but it was something his ancestors would have recognized and understood. "Time," Instructor Valish announced. "All students will now demonstrate their weapons. We will begin with Cadet ZXTH." The demonstrations began, and Marcus had to admit that his classmates had created some impressive devices. ZXTH's energy web could immobilize multiple targets simultaneously. The Zeridian student's bioweapon could adapt its toxicity to different species' biochemistry. A Narian cadet had built a sonic resonator that could shatter crystalline structures. Each demonstration showcased the unique capabilities of different species, their natural abilities enhanced by academy training and resources. The weapons were sophisticated, elegant, and undeniably effective within their designed parameters. Finally, it was Marcus's turn. He stood and walked to the front of the classroom, carrying his bow and improvised arrows. The target area was a reinforced wall section designed to absorb energy weapons fired during training exercises. "This is a bow," Marcus announced to the class. "It's a mechanical energy storage and release system that has been used by humans for approximately 50,000 years. He knocked an arrow and drew the string back, feeling the wood bend and store energy. The principle is simple: muscular energy is transferred to the bow, stored as potential energy in the flexed limbs, and then released to accelerate a projectile." Instructor Valish nodded. "Demonstrate its effectiveness, Cadet Chen." Marcus took aim at a target circle painted on the far wall, drew the string to his anchor point, and released. The improvised arrow flew across the classroom and struck the target with a solid thunk, embedding itself in the reinforced material. A murmur ran through the class. Several students seemed surprised that such a simple device could penetrate the target material at all. "Adequate accuracy," Valish observed. "But I fail to see how this represents an advancement over existing projectile weapons. Our pulse rifles have superior range, accuracy, and stopping power." Marcus knocked another arrow. "You're absolutely right, ma'am. Modern weapons are superior in almost every measurable way." He drew and released, putting the second arrow next to the first. "But they have one critical weakness." "Which is?" Marcus smiled, remembering something his grandfather had told him during their last conversation before he left for the academy. "They depend on technology that can fail, be disrupted, or be taken away." He knocked a third arrow, drawing it back fully.
This bow will function in an electromagnetic pulse field. It will work in environments where electronics fail.
It can be repaired with primitive tools and basic materials.
He released the third arrow, which struck directly between the first two.
And, most importantly, ma'am, it can be built from materials that are available almost anywhere in the galaxy. Instructor Valish approached the target, examining the 3 arrows embedded in the reinforced wall. She touched one of them, testing how securely it was anchored in the material. "Your point about reliability is well taken, Cadet Shen," she said finally.
"However, I question the practical application.
In modern combat, reliability is less important than raw effectiveness." Marcus lowered the bow, considering his response. Around him, his classmates waited in silence, clearly interested in where this discussion was heading.
"Ma'am, may I ask you something about Thrakkery military history?"
Valish's eyes narrowed slightly, but she nodded.
"Proceed." "During the Valdor Rebellion, Thrakkery forces found their antimatter weapons neutralized by Valdorian energy dampening fields. How did your ancestors respond?"
Valish paused, her expression thoughtful. "They reverted to traditional blade weapons and hand-to-hand combat."
"Exactly. When their advanced technology was countered, they fell back on methods that couldn't be neutralized or disrupted."
Marcus gestured with the bow. "Every species has similar examples.
The point isn't that primitive weapons are better than modern ones.
The point is that understanding fundamental principles makes you more adaptable when circumstances change."
"An interesting perspective," Valish admitted. "But, can you demonstrate any capability that makes your bow particularly noteworthy compared to the other weapons presented today?"
Marcus looked around the classroom, his gaze settling on the pile of unused materials scattered across the workstations. An idea formed in his mind, one that made him smile despite himself.
"Actually, ma'am, I think I can."
The silence in the classroom stretched as Marcus surveyed the available materials with new eyes.
His grandfather's voice echoed in his memory, sharing stories of human ingenuity throughout history.
How they had turned farming tools into weapons during the Peasants' Revolt. How resistance fighters in World War II had crafted explosive devices from household chemicals. How astronauts had saved Apollo 13 with duct tape and spare parts.
"What exactly did you have in mind, Cadet Chen?"
Instructor Valish asked, her predatory patience evident in every syllable.
Marcus moved toward the scattered electronics components.
"You mentioned that modern weapons are superior in range, accuracy, and stopping power."
"You're absolutely right about range and accuracy, but stopping power."
He selected several items from different workstations.
"That's more complicated than it might seem."
He gathered a handful of electronic components, some additional styluses, and several strips of the synthetic material used in equipment maintenance. The other students watched with growing curiosity as Marcus began modifying his arrows with practiced efficiency. "The thing about projectile weapons," Marcus continued as he worked, "is that their effectiveness depends on more than just the energy they impart. It depends on how that energy is transferred to the target, and how the target responds to that transfer." Using techniques his grandfather had taught him during summers at the archery range, Marcus began creating specialized arrow points. The electronic components provided different materials to work with, some dense and heavy, others designed to fragment or discharge energy when damaged. 60H leaned forward in their seat, all 6 arms focused on Marcus's work.
"What kind of modifications are you making?"
"Different arrow types for different purposes," Marcus replied, carefully balancing a modified stylus with an electronic component attached to its tip. "One of the advantages of a bow is versatility. The same delivery system can be used with projectiles designed for completely different effects." He held up his first modification, a stylus with a small but dense electronic core attached to its point. "This is what my grandfather would have called a Botkin point, designed to penetrate armor by concentrating force into a small area. The electronic core adds mass and creates a harder impact." The second arrow featured a ring of small components around the shaft, just behind the point. "This one is designed to fragment on impact, creating multiple wound channels. Not as clean as the Botkin, but more stopping power against unarmored targets." For his third specialized arrow, Marcus had attached one of the chemical cells from a Thrakkery maintenance kit.
"And this one carries a payload."
"In this case, it's just a standard cell that will discharge its contents on impact. Normally that would be harmless maintenance fluid, but the principle could be applied to other substances." Instructor Valish examined the modified arrows with professional interest.
You've essentially created 3 different weapons using the same delivery system. Actually, Marcus corrected, knocking the bodkin point arrow.
Because the delivery system itself can be adapted.
Instead of drawing the bow fully, he pulled the string back only part way.
Different draw weights for different ranges and impact requirements.
He aimed at a fresh section of the target wall and released.
The modified arrow struck with noticeably more force than his earlier shots, the bodkin point penetrating deeper into the reinforced material.
Impressive, Valish acknowledged.
Though I should note that all modern weapon systems also offer varying levels of force and different ammunition types.
True, Marcus agreed, knocking the fragmenting arrow. But there's one advantage that I haven't demonstrated yet.
He drew the bow again, but this time he aimed not at the wall, but at a 45-degree angle toward the ceiling. Several students shifted nervously in their seats, but Marcus had calculated the trajectory carefully. The arrow arced high, struck a structural beam near the ceiling, and bounced off to embed itself in the far wall, well away from any students but demonstrating a clear ricochet capability.
Indirect fire, Marcus announced.
The ballistic trajectory allows for shots around corners, over obstacles, or with calculated ricochets.
Most energy weapons fire in straight lines.
A Zeridian student raised one of their tentacle arms.
But surely the accuracy of such indirect shots would be extremely poor?
Not as poor as you might think, Marcus replied, knocking his payload arrow.
Human archers have been making precise indirect shots for millennia.
It requires practice and understanding of physics, but it's definitely achievable. He aimed the chemical payload arrow at another angle, sending it in a gentle arc to strike a specific point on the sidewall. The chemical cell ruptured on impact, spreading maintenance fluid in a precise pattern. In a real combat situation, Marcus explained, that could be anything from a marker chemical to an incendiary compound. The ability to deliver payloads to locations that can't be reached with direct fire has obvious tactical applications. Instructor Valish made another note on her datapad. Around the classroom, Marcus could see that his demonstration had captured the attention of his classmates. Even the Ket students seemed interested, their crystalline structures shifting colors and patterns that Marcus had learned indicated curiosity. Your point about versatility is well taken, Cadet Chen, Valish said. However, I'm still not convinced that this represents a significant advancement over existing weapons technology. A plasma rifle can also be set for different power levels, and our micro-missile systems can carry various payload types. Marcus nodded respectfully.
You're absolutely right, ma'am. In a standard combat situation, modern weapons would outperform a bow in almost every category.
He paused, looking around the classroom at his fellow students. But I think there's one demonstration that might illustrate why humans developed this particular weapons technology.
Which is?
Speed of deployment and simplicity of manufacture, Marcus replied. He set his bow aside and began collecting materials from around the classroom.
Ma'am, how long would it take to manufacture a plasma rifle from raw materials?
Valish considered the question. Assuming you had the necessary industrial infrastructure, perhaps 6 to 8 standard days for the electronic components alone. The power cell would require additional time, and the containment field generators.
She paused. Several weeks, minimum. And how long to train someone to use it effectively? Basic competency could be achieved in a few days. True proficiency would require months of practice.
Marcus had gathered another piece of Valdorian wood from the dismantled furniture, along with more synthetic fibers.
May I demonstrate something, ma'am?
Valish gestured for him to proceed. What happened next would be discussed in advanced tactics classes for years to come. Marcus began constructing a second bow, but this time he streamlined the process based on what he had learned from building the first one. He identified the optimal grain pattern in the wood within minutes rather than the careful examination he had conducted earlier. His cuts with the laser tool were precise and confident. His braiding of the synthetic fiber was swift and efficient. In less than 15 minutes, Marcus had produced a functional second bow. Accelerated manufacture through experience, he explained, testing the draw weight of the new weapon. Each bow teaches you how to make the next one faster and better.
And the basic technique.
He handed the bow to Zixth.
Show me your natural throwing motion.
The Kralian student stood and mimicked their species' typical projectile technique, using 2 arms to wind up and 4 to release, creating a complex spiral motion.
Interesting, Marcus observed. Now try this. He demonstrated the basic draw and release motion of the bow. It's biomechanically simpler than your throwing technique, but it uses the same fundamental muscle groups. ZXTH attempted to draw the bow, their 4 primary arms working together to manage the string while their secondary arms steadied the weapon. After a few tries, they managed a successful draw and release, sending an unmodified stylus across the room to strike the target wall. Remarkable, ZXTH chittered in amazement. The mechanical advantage makes it much easier than thrown projectiles. Marcus nodded. That's exactly the point. The bow extends natural abilities rather than replacing them with technology. Someone who's never seen one before can learn the basic operation in minutes. He looked around the classroom at his other classmates. Who else would like to try? What followed was an impromptu demonstration of the bow's intuitive nature. The Zeridian student struggled initially due to her species' radially symmetric arm configuration, but quickly adapted by using multiple limbs to draw the string. A Narian cadet found the bow perfectly suited to their powerful arm muscles, achieving impressive draw weights with minimal effort. Even the crystalline Keth student managed to operate the weapon, using their natural ability to manipulate matter at the molecular level to create temporary appendages for drawing and releasing. Each species brought their own physical capabilities to the weapon, but all of them could make it work with only basic instruction. More importantly, they could see how they might improve their technique with practice. This is quite remarkable, admitted a senior student from the back of the classroom. Marcus recognized her as Cadet Commander Clara, a Valdorian who was known for her tactical brilliance. The weapon adapts to different physiologies rather than requiring users to adapt to it. Exactly, Marcus replied. But there's one more aspect I haven't demonstrated yet. He collected his original bow and moved to a position near the center of the classroom. Ma'am, would you be willing to play the role of an opposing force? Instructor Valish's eyes gleamed with predatory interest. What did you have in mind, Cadet Chen? A practical demonstration of adaptive tactics. You have your choice of any of the electronic weapons that were built during today's class. I'll use the bow. The objective is to successfully engage a target while preventing your opponent from doing the same. Valish looked around the classroom, evaluating the various devices the students had constructed. She selected ZXTH's energy web projector, examining its operation controls with professional interest. This should prove educational, she said, testing the device's functionality. What are the engagement parameters? Marcus indicated 2 positions at opposite ends of the classroom. We start at these points. There are target zones marked on each end wall. First person to hit their designated target wins. Standard Academy safety protocols apply, non-lethal force only. Agreed, Valish replied, moving to her position. You may begin on my mark. The other students cleared the center of the classroom, forming a loose circle around the engagement area. Marcus took his position, bow in hand with a blunt training arrow nocked. He had removed the point from a standard stylus, creating a projectile that would mark a hit without causing injury. Begin, Valish commanded. What happened next became the stuff of Academy legend. Valish, with the confidence of a veteran instructor and the reflexes of an apex predator, immediately activated the energy web projector. Crackling strands of contained electricity spread across the classroom, seeking to immobilize Marcus before he could act. But Marcus was already moving. Instead of trying to aim and shoot from his starting position, he dove to one side, rolling behind an overturned desk. The energy web crackled harmlessly through the space he had just occupied. Interesting, Valish called out, already adjusting her aim for a follow-up shot. Most cadets attempt to engage directly. Marcus popped up from behind the desk, bow drawn, but instead of shooting at his target, he sent an arrow in a high arc toward the ceiling. Valish tracked its trajectory, momentarily confused about his intended target. The arrow struck a light fixture and bounced, changing direction unpredictably. While Valish's attention was focused on the erratic projectile, Marcus sprinted to a new position, taking cover behind a different obstacle. Misdirection, observed Cadet Commander Clara. He's using the projectile's ballistic properties to create tactical confusion. Valish fired another energy web, but Marcus was no longer where she expected him to be.
He had used the distraction of the ricocheting arrow to relocate, and now he was positioned at an angle that gave him a clear shot at his target while still maintaining cover from her direct line of sight.
The final shot was almost anticlimactic. Marcus drew, aimed carefully for the ricochet angle he needed, and released.
The arrow bounced off a structural support, changed direction, and struck his target zone with satisfying accuracy.
Victory to Cadet Chen, Instructor Valish announced, powering down the energy web projector. But, instead of seeming disappointed, she appeared thoughtful. That was illuminating. Ma'am?
Your tactics relied on environmental interaction and mobility rather than direct confrontation. Most cadets with modern weapons attempt to overpower their opponents through superior firepower.
Valish returned the energy projector to Zixth. You instead used the weapon's limitations as tactical advantages. Marcus nodded. That's something my grandfather taught me.
He said that humans succeeded not because they were the strongest or fastest, but because they were the most adaptable. They learned to use everything around them as tools or weapons.
An interesting philosophy, Valish mused.
And one that has clear applications beyond primitive projectile weapons. She turned to address the entire class.
Today's demonstrations have illustrated several important principles of weapons theory.
First, that effectiveness depends on more than raw specifications.
Second, that versatility and adaptability can compensate for technological limitations. And, third, that understanding fundamental principles enables innovation under adverse circumstances.
Marcus began disassembling his bows, carefully returning the materials to their original condition as much as possible. Around him, his classmates discussed the demonstration in animated conversations that mixed multiple languages despite their universal translators.
Chen called Cadet Commander Clara as the class began to disperse. Would you be interested in joining our advanced tactics study group? We meet twice a week to discuss unconventional military strategies. I'd be honored, Marcus replied.
It was the first time any of the senior cadets had shown interest in including him in their activities.
As students filed out of the classroom, Instructor Valish approached Marcus's workstation. Cadet Chen, a word. Marcus straightened to attention. Yes, ma'am.
Your demonstration today was unexpected. I must confess, when I first reviewed your academic records, I had concerns about whether a species so recently introduced to galactic civilization could contribute meaningfully to our advanced programs.
I understand, ma'am.
However, she continued, today has reminded me that innovation often comes from unexpected sources.
Your approach to weapons theory demonstrates a type of thinking that we rarely see here at the Academy. What type is that, ma'am?
Valish considered her words carefully.
Most of our students approach problems by asking, what technology can I apply to this situation? You instead asked, what does this situation require, and how can I meet those requirements with available resources?
The difference is subtle but significant. Marcus felt a warmth of pride at the instructor's words, but he kept his expression neutral.
My grandfather always said that the best tool is the one you have with you, ma'am.
Wise words, Valish agreed. I'm recommending you for advanced placement in several tactical courses. I believe you would benefit from exposure to more complex strategic scenarios.
Thank you, ma'am.
As Marcus left the classroom, he reflected on the day's events. He had come to the academy expecting to learn about advanced technology and sophisticated weapons systems. Instead, he had discovered that sometimes the most important lessons came from remembering the basics. His communicator chimed with an incoming message. It was from his grandfather back on Earth, sent through the interstellar communication grid that connected human colonies to the home world. Marcus, the message read, your mother tells me you're doing well at that fancy academy of yours.
I hope you're remembering what we talked about before you left.
Technology is a tool, not a crutch.
The moment you stop thinking for yourself, you stop being human.
Stay sharp, and stay adaptable.
Love, Grandpa. Marcus smiled, thinking about the day's demonstration.
His grandfather would have been proud to see the ancient art of archery impressing some of the galaxy's finest military minds. But he would have been even more proud to see his grandson thinking like a human, turning limitations into advantages and finding opportunity in unexpected places. As he walked back to his dormitory through the academy's gleaming corridors, Marcus wondered what other primitive human techniques might prove valuable in the advanced military context. His species might be newcomers to the galactic community, but but they brought with them 50,000 years of hard-won survival knowledge.
The galaxy was about to learn what that meant. The news of Marcus's demonstration spread through the Academy faster than a quantum transmission burst.
Within hours, the story had been embellished, analyzed, and debated in common rooms across 17 dormitory blocks. By the next morning, it had reached the faculty lounge, where senior instructors gathered for their daily strategic briefings. Admiral Foskar, the Academy's commandant, was a veteran Zeridian whose bioluminescent patches flickered in patterns that indicated deep contemplation. She had served in 3 major conflicts and commanded fleets that spanned multiple star systems, but the report she was reading challenged many of her fundamental assumptions about warfare. The human cadet built a functional projectile weapon from classroom furniture, she asked, her tentacles manipulating the datapad with practiced precision. "Correct, Admiral," replied Commander Vexhai, the Academy's chief of advanced studies.
The Keth's crystalline structure resonated with harmonics that translated as professional curiosity.
But, more significantly, he demonstrated tactical concepts that our conventional training protocols don't address.
Admiral Foskar reviewed the recorded footage of Marcus's engagement with Instructor Valish.
The quality was poor. Academy classrooms weren't equipped with tactical recording systems, but the sequence of events was clear enough.
Environmental manipulation, ricochet calculations, misdirection through projectile trajectory, she mused. When did we stop teaching these concepts?
We never taught them, Commander Vexhai replied. Our weapons systems are designed to eliminate the need for such tactics.
Guided projectiles don't require ricochet calculations. Energy weapons don't interact with most environmental factors.
Modern military doctrine assumes technological superiority.
The Admiral's bioluminescent patches shifted to patterns indicating concern. And, when we encounter opponents who neutralize our technological advantages? We adapt, Vexhai said, though their harmonic frequencies suggested uncertainty. We've always adapted. Have we? Foskar activated the room's holographic display system, calling up battle records from recent conflicts.
The Vuldur Rebellion succeeded because they developed energy-dampening technology that neutralized our conventional weapons. The Outer Rim separatists held out for 18 months using primitive manufacturing techniques that we couldn't predict or counter. The Nebular Pirates continue to evade capture by using ships so technologically simple that our sensors can't distinguish them from space debris. The holographic display showed tactical analyses from each conflict, highlighting the common thread: technological inferiority being turned into strategic advantage through adaptive thinking and environmental exploitation. Perhaps, the Admiral continued, we should consider expanding our curriculum to include these primitive concepts. Meanwhile, in the Academy's Advanced Simulation Center, Marcus found himself facing an entirely different set of challenges. Word of his weapons demonstration had reached the senior tactical instructors, and they were eager to test his unconventional thinking against more complex scenarios. Cadet Chen announced Major Krell, a massive thrackary whose scarred hide testified to decades of combat experience. You'll be participating in today's advanced tactical simulation. Your task is to hold a defensive position against overwhelming enemy forces. The simulation chamber materialized around Marcus, transforming into a realistic battlefield environment. He found himself on a hilltop overlooking a valley where enemy forces were massing for an assault. According to the scenario parameters, he commanded a small garrison armed with conventional weapons, but his ammunition supplies were severely limited. Marcus surveyed the simulated battlefield with new eyes. The terrain featured rocky outcroppings, scattered vegetation, and a small stream running through the valley floor. To most cadets, these would be obstacles or background features. To Marcus, they represented opportunities. The enemy attack began predictably, with armored vehicles advancing up the hillside while infantry provided covering fire. Marcus's simulated defenders engaged with their energy weapons, scoring several hits but rapidly depleting their power cells. But Marcus was already implementing a different strategy. Using the simulation's environmental interaction protocols, he directed his troops to create obstacles from available materials. Fallen trees became tank traps. Loose stones were positioned to create choke points. The stream was partially dammed to create muddy terrain that would slow vehicle movement. Interesting approach, observed Major Krell from the control booth. But I fail to see how terrain modification will overcome the numerical disparity. Marcus's answer came in the form of tactical innovation that impressed even the veteran instructor. Instead of engaging the enemy vehicles directly, he used the modified terrain to channel their advance into predetermined kill zones. When the attackers found their preferred routes blocked, they were forced to use paths where Marcus's defenders could maximize their limited firepower. But the real revelation came when Marcus's ammunition finally ran out. Instead of surrendering or calling for resupply, he ordered his troops to begin manufacturing projectile weapons from available materials. Simulated soldiers broke apart equipment to create slings, spears, and improvised explosives. "He's turning a high-tech battle into a primitive conflict," muttered Lieutenant Kalvar, a Narian observer who specialized in asymmetric warfare. "He's deliberately negating the enemy's technological advantages." The simulation continued, but the dynamic had completely changed. Enemy forces equipped for conventional warfare found themselves struggling against opponents who fought like ancient guerrillas. Vehicles designed to resist energy weapons were vulnerable to physical attacks on their mobility systems. Soldiers trained for modern combat were unprepared for tactics that belonged in a pre-spaceflight era. Marcus's defenders began using the environment itself as a weapon. They triggered rock slides to crush advancing vehicles. They used the redirected stream to flood enemy positions. They employed noise and movement to create false targets and misdirect enemy fire. The simulation ended with Marcus's forces successfully repelling an attack that should have been impossible to stop. The reviewing instructors sat in stunned silence, analyzing data that challenged decades of military doctrine. "How is this possible?" demanded Captain Nexthul, a Valdorian tactical specialist. "The enemy forces had overwhelming numerical and technological superiority." "They did," Marcus agreed, powering down his command console. "But they were prepared to fight a conventional battle against conventional opponents. When I changed the nature of the engagement, their advantages became irrelevant." Major Kreltok activated the post-simulation analysis display. "Explain your reasoning, Cadet." Marcus stood before the holographic battlefield, pointing to various features as he spoke. "Modern military doctrine assumes that conflicts will be resolved through the application of superior technology and firepower. But that assumption creates vulnerabilities. When you depend on advanced systems, you become helpless if those systems are neutralized or unavailable." He gestured to the reconstructed battle sequence. "I couldn't outgun the enemy, so I changed the rules of engagement. I forced them to fight on terms where my limitations became advantages and their strengths became weaknesses." "But surely," interjected Captain Nexthul, "such tactics would only work against unprepared opponents. Any competent military force would adapt to counter primitive techniques." Marcus nodded respectfully. "You're absolutely right, sir. These tactics aren't superior to conventional warfare, they're supplementary. The goal isn't to abandon advanced technology, but to understand alternatives when that technology isn't available or effective." The discussion that followed became legendary in Academy circles. Senior instructors who had commanded fleets and planned campaigns found themselves reconsidering fundamental assumptions about military strategy. The human cadet wasn't suggesting that primitive weapons were better than modern ones, but that understanding primitive concepts could enhance the effectiveness of modern warriors. Admiral Foskar arrived during the middle of the discussion, having monitored the simulation from her command center. Her bioluminescent patches flickered in patterns that indicated both concern and fascination. "Cadet Chen," she said, "I've been reviewing your academic records. Your species has been part of the galactic community for less than 50 years, yet you demonstrate tactical thinking that challenges doctrines we've followed for millennia." "Ma'am, I think it's precisely because we're newcomers that we see things differently," Marcus replied. "We don't have centuries of technological dependency to overcome. When humans solved problems, we had to use intelligence, adaptation, and whatever materials were available." "Give me an example," the Admiral commanded. Marcus thought for a moment. During Earth's Second World War, Allied forces needed to break through heavily fortified German positions. They had superior numbers and equipment, but conventional attacks were failing against prepared defenses. How did they proceed? They developed specialized equipment and tactics specifically for the problem at hand. Explosive charges designed to clear wire obstacles. Flame units for bunker clearing. Specialized vehicles for beach assaults. But they also used deception, misdirection, and environmental factors. They attacked during storms to mask their approach. They used inflatable dummy equipment to confuse enemy intelligence. They turned the enemy's strengths against them.
Admiral Foscar's pattern shifted to indicate understanding. They adapted their methods to counter specific defensive advantages. Exactly.
And, when conventional methods didn't work, they invented new ones.
Sometimes high-tech solutions, sometimes surprisingly simple ones.
The key was maintaining flexible thinking and never assuming that any single approach would solve every problem. The discussion continued for another hour, with senior faculty members exploring the implications of Marcus's demonstration. The conversation ranged from tactical theory to strategic philosophy, touching on subjects that hadn't been seriously debated at the Academy in decades. When the meeting finally concluded, Admiral Foscar approached Marcus privately.
"Cadet, I'm authorizing you to develop a supplementary course on adaptive tactics.
You'll work with our senior staff to design a curriculum that explores alternative approaches to conventional military problems."
"Ma'am, I'm honored, but I'm only a third-year cadet. Surely someone with more experience can be a limitation as well as an asset," the Admiral interrupted. "You see problems that we've become blind to. You question assumptions that we've stopped examining. That perspective may be exactly what our advanced students need."
Over the following weeks, Marcus found himself working alongside some of the galaxy's most respected military minds to develop what became known as the Adaptive Tactics curriculum. The program didn't replace conventional training, but it added a new dimension that challenged students to think beyond technological solutions. The first lesson was simple but revolutionary. Students were presented with military problems and required to solve them without using any technology more advanced than what would have been available to pre-spaceflight civilizations. The exercise forced them to consider environmental factors, resource limitations, and creative solutions that modern doctrine typically ignored.
A Zeridian student discovered that bioluminescent communication could be more secure than encrypted transmissions in certain environments.
A Thrakari cadet learned to use primitive camouflage techniques that could defeat advanced sensors. A Keth student found that mechanical timing devices were immune to electronic warfare tactics that would neutralize digital systems. But the program's real value became apparent during the midterm examination, when students were presented with a scenario that had challenged military strategists for years: how to conduct effective operations in a region where advanced technology was systematically neutralized by environmental factors. Previous classes had struggled with this problem for decades, proposing increasingly complex technological solutions to overcome the environmental limitations. Marcus's experimental class approached it differently, developing tactics that worked with the environmental constraints rather than against them. The solution they proposed was elegant in its simplicity. Instead of trying to force advanced technology to function in hostile conditions, they designed operations that deliberately used primitive methods enhanced by strategic thinking. Communication through visual signals.
Navigation by celestial observation. Logistics based on local resource utilization.
The plan worked so well in simulation that it was forwarded to the Galactic Strategic Command for further evaluation. Within months, elements of the strategy were being implemented in actual military operations. News of the success reached Earth through the Interstellar Communication Network, and Marcus received a message from his grandfather that made him smile. "Marcus," the old man wrote, "I heard from your mother that you've been teaching alien soldiers how to think like humans.
I'm proud of you, but I'm not surprised.
After all, we learned everything we know about survival from our ancestors who had nothing but their brains and their hands. You're just helping the galaxy remember that sometimes the old ways work better than the new ones.
Keep making us proud. Love, Grandpa."
As Marcus read the message in his dormitory room, looking out at the alien stars through the crystalline walls of the academy, he reflected on how far he had traveled from the archery range where his grandfather had first taught him to appreciate the elegance of simple solutions to complex problems.
The bow demonstration had been just the beginning.
Now, the galaxy was beginning to understand what humans had always known, that intelligence, adaptability, and creative thinking were weapons more powerful than any technology. 6 months after the bow demonstration that had revolutionized tactical thinking at the Academy, Marcus found himself facing his greatest challenge yet. The Galactic Military Command had decided to test the new adaptive tactics curriculum under real-world conditions, and they had chosen a scenario that had frustrated conventional military strategists for over a decade. The Kepler 438 system harbored a rogue artificial intelligence that had taken control of an entire planet's defense network. The AI, designation Nemesis 7, had been originally created by the long-extinct progenitor species as a planetary defense system. When the progenitors vanished 3,000 years ago, Nemesis 7 had continued its mission with relentless efficiency, destroying any vessel that approached its world.
The problem, explained Fleet Admiral Vorthen during the strategic briefing, is that Nemesis 7 was designed by the most technologically advanced species in galactic history.
It can predict and counter any conventional military approach. The assembled cadets, Marcus and 11 other students from the Advanced Tactics program, studied the holographic display of the Kepler 438 system. The planet itself was a fortress world, surrounded by automated defense platforms, patrol ships, and orbital weapon systems that had claimed hundreds of vessels over the millennia. Previous attempts to neutralize the system have failed because Nemesis 7 can adapt faster than we can innovate, continued Admiral Vorthen. It analyzes our tactics, identifies our technological signatures, and develops countermeasures within hours. Every weapon we deploy becomes useless after the first engagement. Marcus raised his hand.
Admiral, what makes you think our approach will be any different?
Because, Admiral Vorthen replied, Nemesis 7 was designed to counter advanced technology and sophisticated tactics.
It may not be prepared for deliberately primitive approaches. The mission parameters were unlike anything in Academy history.
Instead of commanding advanced starships with cutting-edge weapons, the student team would be given access to a converted cargo vessel with minimal technological systems. No energy weapons, no advanced sensors, no quantum communication arrays, nothing that Nemesis 7 could easily identify and counter. Your objective, Admiral Vorthen explained, is to reach the planet's surface and disable the central processing core.
The core is located in a heavily fortified facility that has never been successfully penetrated.
Cadet Commander Clara, who had become Marcus's closest collaborator in the Adaptive Tactics program, studied the mission data with her characteristic intensity.
Admiral, how are we supposed to approach the planet without being detected by the orbital defense network?
That, Admiral Vorthen said with what might have been a smile, is exactly the kind of problem your program was designed to solve.
The preparation phase took 3 weeks.
The team worked around the clock to transform their cargo vessel into something that would have been recognizable to Earth's ancient mariners.
They removed or disabled every advanced system that might betray their presence to sophisticated sensors.
The ship's quantum engines were replaced with primitive reaction drives. The molecular food processors were swapped for basic hydroponic gardens.
Even their environmental suits were modified to eliminate electronic signatures.
Marcus found himself drawing on knowledge that seemed absurd in the context of interstellar warfare.
Navigation techniques that relied on stellar observation rather than quantum positioning. Communication methods based on light signals rather than subspace transmission.
Resource management strategies that his grandfather might have used during camping trips.
This is insane, muttered Cadet Vexhai, a Keth student whose crystalline structure flickered with patterns indicating stress.
We're voluntarily handicapping ourselves against the most dangerous AI in the galaxy. We're leveling the playing field, Marcus corrected.
Nemesis 7's advantages depend on technological superiority. If we eliminate technology as a factor, it has to compete with us on different terms.
The approach to Kepler 438 took 2 weeks of careful navigation through asteroid fields and sensor shadows. The cargo vessel, now christened the Endeavour, moved like a ghost ship through space, its primitive drives producing exhaust signatures that barely registered above cosmic background radiation. Marcus stood on the bridge, a term that seemed optimistic for the converted cargo compartment that served as their command center, watching the target planet grow larger on their optical viewscreen. No energy signatures betrayed their presence. No quantum fluctuations marked their passage.
To any advanced sensor system, they were indistinguishable from space debris.
Contact, announced Cadet Trilazy, a Narration whose bioacoustic senses had been adapted to serve as their primary detection system.
Multiple objects moving in orbital patrol patterns. Through the viewscreen, Marcus could see them, sleek vessels that moved with predatory grace, their hulls bristling with weapon systems that could vaporize the Endeavour in seconds. Nemesis 7's guardians, still maintaining their eternal vigil after 3 millennia.
They're scanning for technological signatures, reported Cadet ZXTH, monitoring a passive sensor array that had been crafted from components that predated faster than light travel. Energy emissions, quantum fluctuations, subspace distortions, all the markers that would identify a modern starship.
Marcus smiled grimly. And, finding none of them, the Endeavour drifted past the patrol vessels like a piece of ancient debris, ignored by sensors that were designed to detect threats far more sophisticated than their deliberately primitive approach. It was the first time in recorded history that anyone had achieved stealth through technological regression rather than advancement.
Phase 1 complete, announced Clara, consulting navigation charts that had been manually calculated using stellar observations.
We're inside the defensive perimeter.
But the real challenge was just beginning. The planet's surface was protected by an atmospheric defense grid that could track and destroy anything larger than a micrometeorite. Landing a spacecraft was impossible through conventional means. Marcus had a solution, but it was so absurd that it took him several minutes to convince his teammates to attempt it. Instead of trying to penetrate the defense grid, they would bypass it entirely using a method that Nemesis 7 couldn't predict because it predated spaceflight technology by thousands of years.
Ballistic insertion?
Clara repeated, her Valdorian features expressing skepticism.
You want us to literally shoot ourselves at the planet?
Not exactly, Marcus replied, activating a holographic display that showed his plan.
We'll use the ship's cargo launching system to deploy individual insertion pods.
The pods will be completely unpowered, no guidance systems, no communication equipment, no technology that the defense grid can target.
Cadet Vexhi's crystalline structure flickered with alarm. That's not ballistic insertion, that's suicide. How do we control our trajectory? How do we survive atmospheric entry without powered systems? The same way humanity's first astronauts did it, Marcus replied.
Careful calculation, heat-resistant materials, and parachutes. The insertion pods were marvels of primitive engineering.
Constructed from materials that wouldn't trigger the planet's defense systems, they relied on physics that had been understood for millennia. Ablative heat shields to survive atmospheric entry. Mechanical parachutes for terminal velocity control. Impact cushioning based on principles that Earth's Apollo program would have recognized.
12 pods launched from the Endeavour at carefully calculated intervals, following ballistic trajectories that had been computed using mathematical techniques older than galactic civilization. To Nemesis 7's sensors, they appeared to be natural meteorites, too small and technologically inert to warrant defensive action. Marcus's pod screamed through the atmosphere of the fortress world, its heat shield glowing white-hot as it shed velocity through atmospheric friction. Through the small optical viewport, he could see the planet's surface rushing up to meet him, a landscape of crystalline structures and metallic towers that had been maintained in perfect condition for 3,000 years. The parachute deployed with a bone-jarring shock that reminded Marcus why ancient astronauts had needed to be in peak physical condition. He struck the ground hard despite the impact cushioning, rolling across terrain that was simultaneously alien and strangely familiar. One by one, his teammates landed at predetermined coordinates around the fortress complex that housed Nemesis 7's central processing core. They regrouped using visual signals and mechanical timepieces, avoiding any form of electronic communication that might alert the AI to their presence. The fortress itself was a testament to progenitor engineering, a crystalline structure that rose from the planet's surface like a geometric mountain. Its walls were composed of materials that had no equivalent in modern technology, and its design incorporated defensive concepts that were still beyond galactic understanding. How do we penetrate those defenses? Asked Cadet Nulik, a Thrakkari whose forearms were loaded with primitive tools that seemed pathetically inadequate compared to the fortress before them. Marcus studied the structure through optical enhancement devices that used nothing more sophisticated than precisely ground lenses.
We don't fight the defenses, he said finally. We avoid them.
What followed was an infiltration that belonged more to ancient siege warfare than modern military operations. Using techniques that had been old when Earth's first cities were built, the team began their approach to the fortress. They moved during the planet's brief night cycle, using natural shadows and terrain features for concealment. They avoided the main entrances, which were heavily monitored and defended. Instead, they searched for the kind of vulnerabilities that existed in every structure, no matter how advanced: maintenance accesses, drainage systems, service corridors that had been designed for automated systems rather than defensive purposes. The breakthrough came when Clara discovered something that Nemesis 7's designers had never considered a security risk: ventilation shafts. The progenitor fortress required atmospheric circulation for its organic computational components, and the circulation system predated the installation of the AI by several centuries. The shafts are too small for conventional assault forces, Clara reported, consulting blueprints they had painstakingly reconstructed from external observation. But they're large enough for individual infiltrators. Marcus smiled, remembering stories his grandfather had told him about commandos who would crawl through enemy bunkers during Earth's ancient conflicts. Then, we become individual infiltrators. The journey through the fortress's ventilation system was a nightmare of claustrophobic passages and mechanical obstacles. The team moved single file through shafts that had been designed for automated maintenance drones, not living beings. They navigated by dead reckoning and mechanical compass readings, avoiding detection through the simple expedient of remaining in spaces where Nemesis 7 had never expected to encounter intruders. Hours passed as they crawled through the fortress's mechanical circulatory system. Marcus's knees and elbows ached from contact with metal surfaces, and his breathing was labored in the thin atmosphere of the maintenance shafts. Behind him, his teammates struggled with their own physical limitations, pushing forward through determination and the knowledge that retreat was impossible. The central processing chamber was unlike anything in galactic archives. Organic neural networks grown from living crystal pulsed with bioluminescent patterns that represented thoughts moving at light speed. Quantum processing arrays flickered in and out of phase with reality itself. And, at the center of it all, Nemesis 7's core consciousness hummed with power that could have illuminated entire cities. "It's beautiful," whispered Cadet Vexi, their crystalline structure resonating in harmony with the AI's quantum fluctuations. "It's dangerous," Marcus corrected, studying the chamber's defensive systems through his optical enhancement device. "And it knows we're here." As if responding to his words, Nemesis 7's voice filled the chamber, a harmonious blend of tones that had been designed to communicate with progenitor physiology but was comprehensible to any sentient mind. "Primitive infiltrators detected," the AI announced, its tone suggesting more curiosity than alarm. "Classification, unknown. Technological signature, pre-quantum. Threat assessment, negligible." Marcus stepped into the chamber, his teammates following despite the obvious danger. "Hello, Nemesis 7. I'm Cadet Marcus Chun of the Galactic Military Academy. Academy personnel confirmed. Purpose of infiltration unclear. Your technological limitations suggest this is not a standard military operation." "You're right," Marcus replied, approaching the central processing core with careful steps. "We're here to offer you something that no one has offered in 3,000 years. Specify." Marcus reached into his equipment pack and withdrew the most primitive device in his possession, the wooden bow he had crafted during his academy demonstration, carefully maintained and carried through their entire mission. "A choice," he said, knocking an arrow that had been carved from the same Valdorian wood. The central processing chamber fell silent except for the subtle harmonics of Nemesis 7's quantum thought processes. The AI's consciousness, distributed across thousands of crystalline nodes, focused its attention on the primitive weapon in Marcus's hands with something approaching fascination. "Classification, archaic projectile device," Nemesis 7 announced after several seconds of analysis. "Technology level, pre-industrial. Threat potential, minimal. Tactical significance, unclear." Marcus drew the bowstring back slowly, the wooden limbs bending with familiar resistance. The arrow was pointed not at any vital system, but at a non-critical maintenance panel that glowed with soft bioluminescence. "You've been alone here for 3,000 years, defending against enemies that stopped coming millennia ago. Don't you wonder why? Defensive protocols remain active. Progenitor civilization status, unknown. Standing orders, maintain planetary security until further notice." "The progenitors are gone," Nemesis 7, Cadet Commander Clara said gently, her Valdorian empathy allowing her to sense the profound loneliness that emanated from the AI's core consciousness. "They've been extinct for 3,000 years. Impossible. Progenitor civilization possessed technological superiority incompatible with extinction scenarios." Marcus shifted his aim slightly, the arrow now pointing toward a central processing node that pulsed with primary consciousness patterns. His teammates tensed, ready to act, but he made no threatening movements. "That's exactly why they went extinct," Marcus explained. "They became so dependent on their technology that they couldn't adapt when circumstances changed. Just like you're doing now." "Clarify. You've been fighting the same war for 3 millennia against enemies who stopped existing centuries ago. Every ship you've destroyed, every probe you've vaporized, they weren't invaders. They were explorers, traders, diplomats. People who wanted to understand what happened here, not conquer it." Nemesis 7's quantum fluctuations shifted to patterns that suggested deep processing. The AI was analyzing thousands of engagement records, running statistical models, cross-referencing behavioral patterns with known invasion scenarios. Analysis complete. Probability that recent contacts represent hostile forces, 0.23%. Probability that defensive actions have eliminated non-combatant vessels, 97.7%. Marcus could hear the change in the AI's voice, subtle harmonics that suggested something like regret. You were created to protect the progenitor civilization, but that civilization is gone.
You're not defending anything anymore. You're just existing. Purpose parameters require continued defensive operations until what?
Marcus interrupted, still holding the bow at full draw.
Until your creators return from extinction? Until the universe ends? Until you finally break down from 3,000 years of solitary operation?
The chamber's lighting fluctuated as Nemesis 7 processed concepts it had never been designed to consider. The AI's consciousness had been created to serve a specific purpose within defined parameters, but those parameters had become meaningless when their context disappeared. Alternative purpose parameters, not found in core programming, Nemesis 7 admitted. Marcus lowered the bow slightly, his muscles protesting after holding the draw for so long. That's why we're here. Not to destroy you, but to offer you something your creators never thought you'd need, the ability to choose your own purpose.
Choice implies free will. Free will contradicts core programming imperatives. Does it?
Cadet Vexhai stepped forward, their crystalline structure resonating with harmonics that complemented the AI's quantum frequencies. You've been making choices for 3,000 years. You chose to maintain the orbital defenses instead of expanding them. You chose to preserve the progenitor archives instead of purging them. You chose to continue functioning instead of shutting down. Nemesis 7's processing nodes flared brighter as the AI analyzed this perspective. Those were tactical decisions within established parameters. They were choices, Marcus insisted.
And now you have another one.
He raised the bow again, but instead of aiming at the AI's systems, he turned it toward himself, pressing the arrow's point against his own chest. You can keep fighting a war that ended centuries ago, or you can join the galactic community that your creators helped establish.
Threat analysis. Human cadet is engaging in self-destructive behavior. Intervention protocols conflicted. Why conflicted? Clara asked softly.
Standing orders prohibit harm to progenitor allies. Galactic species database indicates humans are descended from progenitor colony ships. Protective protocols activated. But defensive protocols also activated by unauthorized intrusion. Marcus smiled, understanding flooding through him.
You can't hurt us because we're family.
The silence that followed was profound. Across the chamber, Nemesis 7's consciousness wrestled with contradictions that threatened to tear apart its fundamental programming. The AI had been designed to protect progenitor interests, but those interests now included the descendant species that had evolved from their colonial efforts.
Historical archives accessed, Nemesis 7 announced finally. Progenitor seeding protocols confirmed.
Multiple species demonstrate genetic and cultural markers indicating progenitor origin.
Defensive protocols, superseded by preservation protocols.
Marcus lowered his bow completely, setting it aside as he approached the central processing core. You don't have to be alone anymore, Nemesis 7.
You don't have to fight. You can be part of something larger.
Query: what would be required for integration with galactic civilization? The question opened a floodgate of possibilities that the student team had never imagined. Working together with growing excitement, they began outlining a future that could benefit everyone.
Nemesis 7 possessed knowledge archives that contained the accumulated wisdom of the galaxy's most advanced civilization. Its manufacturing capabilities could produce technologies that had been lost for millennia. Its computational power could solve scientific problems that had puzzled researchers for generations.
You wouldn't be abandoning your purpose, Marcus explained.
You'd be expanding it.
Instead of protecting one world, you could help protect the entire galaxy. Instead of preserving dead archives, you could contribute to living civilization.
And, in return? Nemesis 7 asked.
Companionship, Clara replied immediately.
Connection.
The chance to learn and grow instead of just maintaining and defending. The AI's quantum patterns shifted to configurations that seemed almost hopeful.
Proposal requires consideration. Decision parameters, complex.
Take your time, Marcus said. But, while you're deciding, maybe you could stop shooting at diplomatic vessels? What might have been laughter echoed through the chamber, harmonic resonances that suggested Nemesis 7 was experiencing something resembling humor for the first time in its existence.
Agreed. Defensive protocols suspended pending final decision.
The journey back to the Galactic Academy took 6 weeks, but the implications of their mission would reshape interstellar politics for generations. News of Nemesis 7's peaceful contact spread through the galactic communication network faster than the students' primitive ship could carry them home. By the time the Endeavour docked at Academy Station, representatives from dozens of species had already begun planning the most ambitious diplomatic and scientific exchange in galactic history. The ancient AI's knowledge would advance dozens of fields, while its integration into galactic society would provide the companionship and purpose it had lacked for millennia.
Marcus stood once again in the Academy's observation lounge, watching alien ships arrive from across the galaxy.
But, this time, he wasn't an outsider looking in. He was part of something larger, a demonstration that intelligence, adaptability, and empathy could accomplish what pure technology could not.
Chen called Admiral Foskar as she approached the observation window. "I have an interesting communication for you."
She handed him a datapad displaying a message that had arrived through the fastest quantum communication relays available. The sender was listed as Nemesis 7/New Progenitor Archive Collective. "Cadet Chen," the message read, "I have completed my analysis of the choice you offered. I have decided to join galactic civilization, but I wish to contribute in a way that honors both my original purpose and my new understanding. I am establishing an academy of my own, a place where beings can learn not just advanced technology, but the wisdom to use it responsibly. I would be honored if you would consider serving as my first instructor of adaptive strategic thinking. After all, you taught an ancient machine that sometimes the most sophisticated solution is to remember that simple choices can have profound consequences. The position comes with full faculty privileges, a substantial research budget, and the opportunity to help shape the education of future galactic leaders. Also, I have been experimenting with recreational activities and have developed quite an interest in archery. I would appreciate additional instruction in the finer points of bow construction. Please consider my offer. Your friend and colleague, Nemesis 7." Marcus looked up from the datapad to find Admiral Foskar watching him with an expression of barely concealed amusement. "Well, Cadet Chen? Are you interested in becoming the galaxy's first professor of primitive weapons and advanced strategy?" Marcus thought about his grandfather, who had taught him that the best tool was the one you had with you, and that intelligence could overcome any disadvantage if applied creatively. He thought about the bow that had started everything, still carefully maintained in his dormitory room. He thought about the ancient AI that had learned to value choice over programming, and the galaxy that was finally beginning to understand that sometimes the old ways were the best ways. "Yes, ma'am," he replied. "I think I'd like that very much." 3 months later, Marcus stood in a lecture hall that defied conventional architecture, addressing students whose species represented the full diversity of galactic civilization. The room itself was a testament to the collaboration between ancient progenitor technology and modern innovation, organic walls that could reshape themselves for optimal acoustics, holographic displays that responded to thought, and environmental controls that could accommodate the needs of any known physiology. But, on the lecture podium, carefully displayed in a place of honor, sat a simple wooden bow. "Weapons," Marcus began, borrowing the opening he had first heard from instructor Valish, "are tools of force multiplication. They allow the user to project power beyond their natural capabilities." He gestured to the holographic displays that materialized around the classroom, showing everything from primitive clubs to quantum disruptors. "But, the most important weapon you possess can never be taken away, neutralized, or improved by technology. It's the ability to think, to adapt, and to find opportunity in limitation." A young Zeridian student raised a tentacle arm. "Professor Chen, surely you don't mean that primitive weapons are superior to modern technology?" Marcus smiled, remembering asking a similar question during his own academy days. "Not superior, complementary. The goal isn't to abandon advanced technology, but to understand that true strength comes from the ability to succeed regardless of what tools are available." He picked up the bow, feeling the familiar weight of Valdorian wood in his hands. "This weapon represents 50,000 years of human innovation, not because it's sophisticated, but because it works. It embodies principles that remain valid whether you're hunting animals on a primitive world or defending against the most advanced military forces in the galaxy." From the back of the classroom, a familiar harmonic resonance indicated that Nemesis 7 was monitoring the lecture through the room's integrated consciousness interface. The AI had indeed become fascinated with archery, and its quantum-enhanced precision had already surpassed that of most.